So I just watched Gotti, and it was bad. Now, it seems like the only reason anyone's interested in this movie at all is because it has a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is weird because Richard Roper gave it a 2.5 out of 4, and that counted as a positive review on Metacritic. And your website literally says that fresh reviews are those 60% and over. 2.5 out of 4 is the same as 62.5 out of 100, which is clearly rounded to 63 on Metacritic. So why is Richard Roper's review considered rotten? David Nusser gave Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom a 2.5 out of 4. How come that one's considered fresh? Why are they both the same rating, but one's considered fresh and one's considered rotten? Why is your website so shitty? Why are you lying to us, Rotten Tomatoes? That's at least 1 out of the 32 critics that gave it a fresh review. The tomato meter on Gotti shouldn't say 0, it should say 3. Hashtag stop the madness. Hashtag Gotti did nothing wrong. Hashtag guys, I know it says 0, but it's actually 3 if you think about it. Anyway, Gotti was still a pretty bad movie regardless. Definitely not the worst film I've seen all year, but there was quite a lot that was holding it back. First of all, this film suffered through what is known as development hell. Fiore Films secured the rights to the story back in 2010, but for whatever reason they just kept changing around actors and directors. Joe Pesci gained 30 pounds for a role in this film before his part was changed and his salary was cut. So obviously he sued the production company for $3 million and the case was settled out of court. That's pretty ridiculous. If you go to the official website for Fiore Films LLC, you can see that they're still using 2 of the old titles for the film. What a mess. Surprisingly, John Travolta's acting wasn't as bad as I was expecting. There were some scenes where his accent and performance worked really well. Unfortunately, it was kind of inconsistent throughout the film, though. There's a pretty hilarious scene where he finds out some bad news and starts crying, and he does the whole slowly bite my fist action. It was nowhere near convincing, and it was pretty fucking hilarious. And speaking of acting, there's several child actors in this film, all of whom are pretty terrible. Overall, it didn't feel as though the movie was particularly well shot. Nothing really special stood out in terms of cinematography or shot composition. And for some reason, they kept cutting to a lot of stock footage. In some instances, it kind of made sense to fit with the time period, I guess. It might have even been cool if the whole film was shot like that. But there are some instances in which it's just so incredibly unfitting. The characters are out in the street having a party and they look up and see fireworks, but the fireworks are just low-res, grainy stock footage. And it cuts back and forth from the characters to the fireworks like 3 different times. It's very odd and distracting. One of the absolute worst aspects to this film is its soundtrack, which I am now learning is scored by Pitbull for some reason. There aren't that many soundtracks that I would genuinely call ugly, but the soundtrack in this film legitimately made things a lot worse. There are several scenes that wouldn't feel nearly as cheesy if the soundtrack simply wasn't there. Hey, the film has an important and pivotal scene that people are supposed to take seriously? Why don't we throw in a bunch of synthesized string instruments that sound like they're coming from a MIDI keyboard? Seriously, it turns so many scenes into gigantic cheese balls. The soundtrack might as well have come from a workers' safety video. It was awful.
You modify, you pivot, and you find ways to, no matter what, make it happen. Let's just say with that, because hey, the word in impossible is possible. And let me tell you, we possible.
And obviously, with this being a mobster crime drama, we had licensed songs to go along with the film as well. And they were exactly the songs you would expect. Very cliched and unspecial choices for this movie. And even with everything I've mentioned here, the film wouldn't be so terrible if it just had a decent story, but that was its biggest problem. It didn't really have any structure. This is one of the most repetitive movies I've ever seen. We just keep seeing the same scenes over and over again. John yells at someone, we get some random crime talk, and then people get shot, and then John yells at someone, and then we get some random crime talk, and then people get shot. It didn't really feel like anything progressed in this film. It just kind of kept going around in circles until it ended. The film technically showed his rise to power, but it didn't really feel like it at all. We didn't really get any kind of story showcasing how the character got to his level of notoriety. There is a point in the film where they're like, okay, now you're the boss of this organization, motivation, but it doesn't change anything. He just continues doing the exact same shit we already saw him do in the first half of the movie. It's just not interesting. There was no growth, and the character wasn't interesting enough to justify it. He wasn't unique or interesting enough to be able to call this a character study. I'm not sure what we're supposed to get out of this story. There's no reason why anyone should care what happens to him. The ending is already revealed at the beginning of the movie, and the entire journey to get there is just repetitive as shit. There's a scene that they keep cutting back to in the movie where he's talking to his son. His son explains where law enforcement is offering him a deal where he won't have to do as much time in exchange for giving them some information. And John Travolta's like, you shouldn't bow down to those pigs. You're a family, and this honor and family business. And that's about all there is to this scene. But they keep interrupting the movie to cut back to it, and it's just them saying the exact same thing in different words. They're just rephrasing what we've already learned. No new information or conflict is presented, but the film cuts back to this scene 5 times. Why? By the end of this film, it feels like nothing happened. I'm not really sure what anyone was supposed to get out of this movie. This film wasn't as much of a gigantic dumpster fire as I would have imagined from a 0% Rotten Tomatoes score. The scenes with gun violence were actually well executed. The effects looked nice, the makeup was well done. There were people involved on this production that actually gave a shit, so it's unfortunate that there were other people dragging them down. Anyway, obviously do not check out this movie. If you're looking for a so bad that it's good movie, I would suggest looking elsewhere, because this one was just kind of boring. And I'm giving this one a 2 or 3 out of 10. I haven't decided, but I guess it doesn't really fucking matter that much at this point anyway, does it?